Good morning, New York Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on the Big Blue View YouTube channel. I'm here with Big Blue View's Tony DelGenio, and we are going to discuss Sunday's 28-3 annihilation of the Giants by the Philadelphia Eagles. A really embarrassing day for your New York Giants, and we'll get into all of our thoughts on that as we go forward. Tony, how are you this morning?
I'm doing great, thank you.
So I'm not even sure where to begin this morning. I think the place to begin is, at least for me, is this really is John Mara's worst nightmare, Joe Shane's worst nightmare. The way that Sunday unfolded is really as bad as it could have been for the New York Giants. Under the circumstances, with Saquon running wild and doing the Giants a favor by not playing in the fourth quarter. But just the way the game unfolded, it's really, for me, as bad as it possibly could have been.
Yeah, I guess so. Of course, naturally, you never like losing to the Eagles at home. I have to admit that the Saquon Barkley angle doesn't really do anything for me one way or the other. I figured he would have a good game. I figured they would give the ball to him a lot, and to me, it's more about where the Giants' weaknesses on defense are that explain why he went off for so much yardage, and namely they're weak in the defensive interior, especially when Dexter Lawrence is not on the field, and they're weak on the edge with Burns and Thibodeau not on the field, and then you run over to Azeez Ojulari's side, and you can get around the edge, and so they took advantage of that yesterday. Obviously, Barkley must have been very, very motivated to do well, but I have no ill will towards Barkley, and so it's fine. If they were going to lose the game, they're going to lose the game. That part of it didn't bother me too much. It's my concern is more about the overall play of the team than that particular thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not necessarily about Saquon Barkley. It's simply, when you think about it, it's just, yeah. And I have no ill will toward Barkley either. And to be honest, he got booed yesterday, and there was less and less enthusiasm for that booing as the game went along. But you're right. It's not necessarily about Barkley. It's about, there shouldn't be any ill will toward him. He did what he thought was right for himself, and the Giants did what they thought was right for their organization, and so be it. But really, it's about the New York Giants, and what we're seeing is, unfortunately, just, for me, it just wasn't good. There was nothing good about yesterday. And that's the truly disturbing part.
Yeah, I mean, I can find isolated good things to latch on to in the game, but they're few and far between. I think that Drew Phillips, for example, continues to play very nicely as a Giant, and there's not a whole lot else that you can talk to. It's good to have Neighbors back on the field. Not that they made any use of him after the first half, but it was good for him to be back at least.
Yeah, let's start with or let's go to the benching of Daniel Jones. And Jones wasn't thrilled about it. It was 28-3. It didn't make any difference. I think we saw in a handful of snaps that Drew Lock's not very good either. But, Brian Daboll quickly said in his post-game press conference that Daniel Jones remains the quarterback, that he'll start next week against the Pittsburgh Steelers. and I don't necessarily know that letting Drew Lock play a couple of series, opens up a can of worms for the Giants. It was just an indicator of just how badly the Giants played on on offense on Sunday. And I give credit to one of the other media members for coming up with this number, but the New York Giants had 119 yards of total offense on Sunday. The last time they put up a number close to that wasn't even in this century. It was in 1999 in week 1 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers when they had 107 yards of total offense. And Brian Daboll doesn't have the answers. He says, well, I know what the problems are, and we practice them every week, but he clearly doesn't have the answers. I mean, part of the answer is quarterback play, of course, but it goes beyond that. So I don't know what to say about this offense at this point, because this is Brian Daboll's baby, and it's not going well.
Yeah, I've been wondering, just based on how they're approaching the season, to what kinds of conversations that Dable and Joe Shane had with John Mara over the winter that we did not see on
Right.
Hard Knocks.
Right.
And I mean, and this is just a wild guess on my part, because I've been trying to understand how Dable is approaching the games, and so the thing that stood out to me yesterday, I mean, other than the overall terrible effort from the Giants, but the thing that stood out to me yesterday was that in the first half they only ran the ball 3 times, other than runs that Jones kept the ball himself, whether on keepers or scrambles. But they only had three designed runs to running backs in the first half. And obviously they weren't getting very far with the offense, and obviously the Eagles were putting a good pass rush on them, whether it was through blitzes. They had Nakobe Dean coming up the middle, or just the Giants' offensive line failures with Joshua Azudu having another tough time trying to play tackle, and John Michael Schmitz, also just not showing kind of the lateral movement that you need to pick up blitzes and things like that. And I just wonder why they ran the offense that way in the first half, when it was still a game, and it just makes me think that they maybe had a conversation with Mara saying, look, we don't think we're there yet. We'll play to win as much as possible this season with what we have, or we can just find out once and for all whether the guys we have can run the type of offense that we actually want to run. And we'll give them a chance to demonstrate that they can or that they can't. And because, letting Daniel Jones go at the end of the season after 2 years of his 4-year contract will be a big deal, even though this offseason would be the obvious time to do it from a financial standpoint. And you really have to have all the information that you need to have in order to make a big decision like that. And so in order to have that information, you have to say, we're going to put the ball in your hands, go win the game for us and show us that you can win games for us. And that's kind of what they did yesterday, and what they've been doing actually quite a bit this season. And of course, he's showing them that he can't win games for them. And
Yeah, go ahead, Tony. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's it.
No, I think you're right. And I looked at it last night, and including a couple of plays that didn't count because of penalties, I went through, I think, the first 21 plays, 3 or 4 drives, whatever it was, 3 or 4 times that the Giants had the ball. They ran 21 plays. 17 of those plays were pass plays. 17. couple of those are designed runs. That included sacks and Jones scrambles and all of that. But there were only 4 running plays called, and only a couple of those to running backs. Like you said, 3 carries between Tyrone Tracy and Devin Singletary. And it's such a weird thing, Tony, because I have said they're playing offense by inches. And you're right. I've also said in the past that it's clear Brian Daboll wants to run an offense that is quarterback centric, that runs through his quarterback. And maybe the point is that they are trying to ultimately drive it home to John Mara that Daniel Jones cannot lead that kind of an offense. And yet it's hard to watch, because I also think, and I think yesterday was an example of this, they're trying to run the offense through Daniel Jones and trying to put the ball in his hands. And yet at the same time, the play calling is handicapping what the Giants can do on offense at the same time. I'm sitting next to Patty Traina in the press box yesterday, and the very first play for the Giants was an RPO slant thrown to Malik Neighbors. And I said to Patty, I said, that's the same play they've run on the first play they've had the ball pretty much every single time this season. And on third down, then we're going to see a handoff. Then we're going to see a quarterback run. Then we're going to see a 2-yard pass to Wan'Dale Robinson. And on every third down, we're going to see a stick route or some sort of 2-yard pass to Wan'Dale. And that's exactly what we saw. And then, Daboll was asked about explosive plays at the end of the game, and he said, well, you can't play good offense when your longest play is 14 yards. Well, when all of your pass routes are within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage, and a lot of times 5 yards of the line of scrimmage, and your running game consists of quarterback draws and 2nd and 1 quarterback sneaks, and your offensive line is as bad as the offensive line was yesterday, you can't run an offense that way. And I do wonder what it is that Brian Daboll is trying to accomplish. Is he trying to just, as you said, just drive home that Daniel Jones isn't good enough? Is he trying to do what I think Joe Judge did too often toward the end of his tenure, which is just play to the scoreboard so that it's not as embarrassing as it turned out to be? I don't know what he's trying to accomplish, but it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like they're really attacking and being aggressive.
Yeah, and I mean, yesterday's game in particular, just watching it live on TV where you can't see the full field and know what the safeties are doing and so on. But but we know that the defense that they were playing against yesterday, that's coordinated by Vic Fangio. We know what their modus operandi is. It's to show 2 high safeties before the snap, and then at the snap sometimes rotate out of those 2 high safeties, bring one down, or do whatever. And that type of defense, I think, puts a premium on the quarterback being able to make a read post snap. And I just wonder, and it'll be interesting to see what people who look at the all 22 and analyze things as we have to say. But I just wonder whether there were plays to be made deeper that Jones didn't recognize, and that's why the offense looked as conservative as it did, because of what Fangio tries to kind of force a quarterback into doing. I don't know. I mean, we're just grasping at straws at this point.
My reaction to that, Tony, quickly, just, I haven't rewatched the game yet. The all 22 isn't available to me yet, but sitting in the press box, my reaction to that is there are a lot of things that you can blame on Daniel Jones there. And we've said over and over, he doesn't lift his team. He can't play above his circumstances. And I thought yesterday was an example of that. I just thought he really didn't have a chance because the pressure in the pocket was constant. And yet, you saw a couple times during the game where he was pulling the ball down and where he was unsure of what to do with it. I didn't really think there were plays to be made that he didn't take shots on. Just that was my impression just from watching the game, from up high in the press box. Maybe I'll have a different impression when I rewatch the game. I thought maybe there was one throw he could have made, which would have been a little outlet throw where he ended up taking a sack or something. But overall, I really didn't think so, at least, watching the game live. Um, but the clear thing about Daniel Jones, and I think we've known this for a while, is that Jones cannot play above his circumstances. The best quarterbacks in the league can. He cannot, at least not consistently. He cannot. And as much as I've supported over the years and said, look, there are certain circumstances where the Giants have had to stay with Daniel Jones. I think the reality of it is the Giants are going to spin their wheels here until we get to the end of the season and until they make a decision to at least try somebody to at least to go in a different direction and start over with a different, hopefully, franchise quarterback.
Yeah, and coming back to the original point about the Giants passing almost every down in the first half. If you look at the other side of the ball, Jalen Hurts did not have a very good game yesterday either. I think he had like 110 yards passing or something like that. He had the one big play to A.J. Brown when Cordell Flott had to come off the field on 4th and 3 with a groin injury, with another groin injury. Right, the 16th or 17th groin injury Giant has had this season, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems
the
like
injury of the year, injury du jour.
And he promptly then went deep to A.J. Brown for the 41-yard touchdown. But other than that, he only had like 70-something yards passing, and he was running around and being chased by the Giants all day, and he did not have a particularly good game either. And so, I think the Eagles are not in a whole lot better situation at quarterback than the Giants are right now. In fact, in some ways worse, because Hurts is making a lot more money than Jones is, and they can't get out of his contract very, very easily. But the Eagles, I think, have so much talent in other positions. And what did the Eagles do yesterday that allowed them to win 28-3? They just kept on giving the ball to Barkley, running the ball. And gradually, by the second half, the Giants just couldn't keep up with it anymore. And so there's kind of a difference in approach to the game yesterday, where the Eagles did not ask Jalen Hurts to win the game for them yesterday, and Dable did ask Daniel Jones to win the game for them yesterday.
Yeah, and it's mystifying in a way, and because of the fact that you're dealing with an offensive line missing its best player, and you're scuffling to protect the guy, and you want to keep the ball away from Saquon if you can, and they refuse to run the football unless they were running quarterback power with Jones and trying to get him killed.
Yeah.
Which I'm not sure I feel good about that either.
Right.
But it was mystifying. Brian Daboll said after the game, he was actually asked if Daniel Jones limits the offense, and he simply said no. What else is he going to say? The fact of the matter is, I think that he's putting the ball in Daniel Jones's hands while at the same time trying to run a passing attack that clearly recognizes the guy's limitations and limits the offense. So they're sort of polar opposite goals, because you're not going to get explosive plays, or not going to get very many the Giants are playing. Tony, let me ask you this. You know, when you get close to something, you know, your view of it gets skewed, and then you get a little farther away, and you think about it a little bit more. But we know what John Mara said about Barkley going to the Eagles, about having sleepless nights and all that. I have defended Brian Daboll and said the best case scenario for the Giants is if Daboll and Shane continue after this year. But I just, coming out of yesterday, coming out of the way that things have gone the last couple of weeks, the fact that they're 2-5, the fact that John Mara said in the summer that he wanted to see improvement, and Daboll and Shane knew what he wanted to see. I can't shake the idea that these guys might be in a little bit of hot water at this point. I mean, it's not so late that they can't fix it, but I can't shake the idea that I think that they might be in some hot water.
And I can understand that. And this is the type of question that you would love to have been a fly on the wall during the winter when the conversations with John Mara were happening. And if you look at how the Giants have constructed their roster, they have, for the most part, refused to go out and sign veteran free agents who are getting on in years to bring in someone who would give legitimacy to a position group right away, other than the offensive line, where I think they realized they had a disaster on their hands and said, let us just find a few veteran free agents to bring in. But at all the other positions on the team, they're for the most part going with youth, right? And not spending a lot of money on free agents. And it makes me think that the conversations that they had with Mara over the winter were, we need to be able to kind of build the team and find out once and for all what we have in our quarterback, so that we can confidently make a decision at the end of the season what to do with him. The one thing that really struck me before I went to bed last night, and I say before I went to bed last night because it wasn't until I was ready to go to bed that we knew this, but the Giants are not the only 2-5 team in New York.
This is very true. This is very true.
And yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it is rather enjoyable to watch that other team, stumble and bumble as well. The only disturbing thing about last night from that perspective, Tony, is what you watched from the Pittsburgh Steelers, and when you think that the Giants have to go to Pittsburgh and play that next Monday.
Yeah, that occurred to me too. But no, but as I'm watching that, I'm thinking that they're a dumpster fire every bit as much as the Giants are, and in fact more so than the Giants are, because they are seen by their owner as being firmly within their Super Bowl window. They have done everything they can to bring in veterans, and not just veterans, but old veterans in many cases, right? And they just keep bringing in more veterans. We don't like our wide receivers. Bring in Randall Cobb. Oh, bring in Alan Lazard. Oh, bring in Devontae Adams. Bring in Mike Williams. Right, and they still can't get a passing offense going, even though they bring in these guys who are good name wide receivers and so on. And so they're in a position now where I think it's got to be pretty obvious that they're going to have a GM shakeup at the end of the year if things don't turn around for them. And they're stuck in a bad spot, even though they do have kind of a lot of talent on other places in the team, but yeah, for whatever reason, they just look like an awful team too. And so, watching that just made me think that maybe Mara agreed that he'd give Shane and Dable this year to try to make it work with what they have, and then they'd have his blessing to go on, and that they're not actually in jeopardy of being fired, as long as Dable doesn't go on a Joe Judge 11-minute rant in a press conference. And I don't think you ever have to worry about Dable going on for 11 minutes about anything. He gives more 2-word answers than or 1-word answers. You said no.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and you raise a really good point, because Joe Shane, everybody made a big fuss out of his "this is the year for Daniel" comment on Hard Knocks, but in a private moment, did Joe Shane and Brian Daboll say, this is the situation that we're in, and we will do the best we can, and it very well might not go well. Did they have that conversation? Because if they did, if and John Mara said he understood why, then that puts a different spin on it. But we don't know if they had that conversation. So it's just judging from what you see, it's just difficult to watch. And we've talked a lot, Tony, about game day roster management. We've talked a lot about personnel decisions going back to last year. And again, we don't know why they did this, but we saw Josh Azudu struggle at left tackle mightily yesterday, give up 2 sacks in the first 3 drives. And I want to say this about Josh Azudu. Josh Azudu is the nicest kid. All right. He is a nice kid to talk to. He's a good guy. I think he's a good guy placed in a bad situation. But I've tried to give him as much benefit of the doubt as possible, because the Giants put him in an impossible situation last year. Playing him at left tackle after not practicing him at left tackle. This year, they have at least practiced him at left tackle since the spring. But they went back to the same Andrew Thomas protection plan that they had last year, which is play a kid who showed you last year that he can't play the position. And it dawned on me last night, and I wrote it in my Things I Think column. Usually you see failed tackles move inside to guard. You don't usually see failed guards tried at left tackle as a quarterback's blindside protector. When does that work? And obviously it didn't work last night, and that wasn't surprising. But I think probably so the Giants get criticism for that, but beyond that, 4/5 of that offensive line that had played pretty well for the first 6 weeks was still there. And I don't think any of them played well. And that might even be more disturbing to me than what we saw from Josh Azudu, because what we saw from Josh Azudu is probably what we should have expected to see.
Yeah. And again, I've thought about the Josh Azudu thing, and the first thing to say, okay, is that if there's one thing that you can definitely blame Joe Shane for, it's the offensive line situation, because he has drafted 4 offensive linemen now, and not a single one of them has demonstrated that he's capable of actually playing on a regular basis.
And that includes John Michael Schmitz. which
Right,
I'm
and that
sure we'll get
includes
to.
John Michael Schmitz. That's right. That's right. Because I mean, John Michael Schmitz has his moments, and I think he's in particular. He's a fairly good run blocker, but he hasn't really shown us that he can hold up in pass protection. So I think the jury is out on him, still halfway into his second year, and
I
of course,
was
yeah. Go ahead.
I was very disturbed by, John Michael Schmitz. I don't know what the stats will say, but I thought he was directly responsible for at least two, maybe three sacks yesterday. But I mean, he got dominated by Jalen Carter. But the one that disturbed me the most, and I don't know if it was because he's not athletic enough or because he didn't recognize the play, but Nakobe Dean jumped into the gap next to him and blew past him before John Michael Schmitz even had a chance to basically lay a glove on the guy. And I don't know which answer would bother me more. Was he not athletic enough to make that play? Or as the center who's responsible for making the line calls and setting the protection, did he not recognize the play? Neither one of those answers is good for John Michael Schmitz.
Right.
I'm just not sure which one would bother me more.
Yeah. 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 That's a good question. I don't think there's a good answer to that. And so, yeah, so I put him firmly in the group of four offensive linemen that Shane has drafted, and none of whom have really shown out yet. And so I guess there's still time with Schmitz, but there's not a whole lot of time
No.
left. And that one play in particular, I think it was obvious that he did something wrong on that play, whichever one of those two things it actually was. And so uh, I think it's clear that in the next draft, Shane or whoever is the GM, if Shane doesn't last, has to go back to the offensive line and pick a couple more linemen, because
I honestly, I don't think Joe Shane is going to pick the next offensive lineman. Even if he is the GM, I don't think Joe Shane picks the next offensive lineman. I think Chris Snee picks the next offensive lineman that the Giants take in the draft. I think Chris Snee is the guy who says, this is the guy we're going after. That's John Mara has a lot of faith in Chris Snee. Chris Snee was a great Giant. They brought him in specifically. They brought him in this past offseason specifically to scout offensive linemen. It would not surprise me at all if, when they go back to the well for offensive linemen, if Chris Snee has the loudest voice in the room.
Well, that would be interesting, and I think that would be a welcome thing to give Joe Shane a little bit of an out on this, and this is no different from any other new GM that comes into a team, but he came into the Giants in January and only had 3 months basically before the Giants had to draft, and so you don't have a lot of time to figure out who you want and so on. And so that first year when he drafted Neal and McKeithen, well, I don't know. I mean, I still don't understand the Evan Neal thing. I mean, everybody thought he would be a successful offensive tackle, and he hasn't been. But the fact is, and Azudu was in that first draft.
No,
as well.
Azudu and McKethan, I think, were in the second draft.
Were they in the second one?
Yeah, because I think they were in the second draft, but
I thought they were in that first one. That's the year he had 11 draft picks, right?
Did he draft three
traded down
offensive linemen that year? You might be right. I think he might have drafted three offensive linemen that year. You're right, because this is Azudu's third year.
Yeah.
Right. You're right. Yep.
Yeah. So in some sense, he was coming in and didn't have a lot of time to learn things, and the Giants had whatever scouting situation they had in place when he arrived, and he didn't get a chance to organize things to his liking until the next year. But the fact is, here we are in year 3 of the regime, and the Giants still do not have a young offensive lineman anywhere along the line that you can feel is a building block for the future. And he did a good job, signing Illuminor and Runyon, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And and Van Roten is who Van Roten is. He's not terrible, but he's not great. So he did okay on that part. But the fact is, the Giants have not built a young offensive line for the future. And so regardless of who the GM is, I think the Giants are going to have to draft a couple of linemen this year. And if Chris Nee is the guy who's actually deciding that, well, then to me, that's probably a good thing. You hope that he has the same insights as a scout that he did as a player. And so that would be a great thing. But it's obviously a continuing problem for them.
Yeah. Tony, let's talk about Tay Banks for a minute. I like Tay. Tay went to Maryland. I went to Maryland. I've had as much as you can have conversations with Tay Banks, because after you walk by his locker and after he says, "Hey, what's up, my guy?" he says basically nothing else. Even if you put your recorder away and you're just shooting the breeze with the kid, he barely says anything. I don't think he's a bad kid. I don't think he's a misguided kid. But this is twice this year now. Where his effort in losing causes was just not acceptable. And he can explain it away any way he wants, and he can say he was frustrated. But this is a guy who you're counting on to be your number one corner. You're counting on him to be a cornerstone of your future. And you just can't have this, especially, Tony, and I wrote this morning, especially when you're watching Brian Burns drag himself on and off the field, and yet snap to snap be insanely productive when he's dragging himself, to the huddle and dragging himself to the line of scrimmage. I've seen Burns for the last couple of weeks. Just he stands at his locker and he doesn't stand there. He basically stands there bent over, and he doesn't feel good. He's not comfortable. He's playing through a lot. And you watch a teammate like that give that kind of effort, and then you do what Tay did yesterday, and that's just not acceptable.
Yeah, and you have to hope that the Giants have veterans on the defensive side of the ball in that locker room who kind of take care of that business and let Banks know that, what, this is not going to cut it. And if you want to hang around, we need to see better effort from you. I mean, and Burns can be one of those guys. I would say the obvious guy to be one of those guys is Dexter Lawrence, because
I think Dexter more than anybody else maybe has become the leader of that team.
Mm-hmm.
So he would be the guy that someone like that would have to answer to, I think.
Yeah. And you just hope that they could kind of impress upon him that there's a standard of play out there that has nothing to do with skill, but
right.
everything to do with effort.
Right. And has to do with establishing a quote unquote winning culture, and the kind of culture and the kind of effort and attitude that you want to go forward with. To me, that just wasn't, like I said, it just wasn't acceptable. And yesterday would have been easier for me to deal with if it had been isolated, not in terms of Banks, but in terms of overall. And that's the problem that I find myself struggling with today, is that you can't explain away any of these things as isolated after what we've seen for the last couple of years. And I think I think that's where you understand all of the frustration and the angst of the fan base at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. And, the question, obviously, if your ownership is, where do you go from here? And you can start over again.
Right. Is there enough, evidence, underneath in what's been built underneath the obvious, the issue with quarterback, and the still ongoing issue of needing to improve that offensive line. Are you seeing enough, to go forward with this regime? Because to be honest, if you start over again, you don't know what you're going to get. You're going to blow up another roster. It's going to be another 3 years before you have any chance of probably being good. And do you want to go through that again? I just don't know. I don't know. I
Yeah.
think these next 10 games, these next 10 games are going to tell a lot.
Yeah. And let's face it, in the end, so much of it comes down to the quarterback. And so, you look at where Washington is right now, and yeah, they brought in other players as well who are helping them. But I don't think Washington is all that much better a team than they were last year, with one big exception, right? And that is that they're getting excellent quarterback play from a rookie. And when you get excellent quarterback play, everything else seems to work out okay. And when you don't get it, then things just don't seem to work out. I mean, you look at Jack. I mean, and look at Philadelphia. Okay, Philadelphia. Yeah, they won handily yesterday, but coming into that game, Philadelphia has been a team that's been kind of on the edge of the playoff hunt, and that's a team that's had Super Bowl aspirations ever since they almost got one a couple of years ago, and they look nothing like a Super Bowl team, except yesterday they started to look more like one. But they really, they're not getting great play from their quarterback, and I think that's a good part of the reason why they're not doing better. You look at Washington; they are getting great quarterback play, at least for a rookie, from their quarterback, and they are firmly in the playoff picture. I mean, maybe even to win the division. You look at the Detroit Lions, and great that they've built up a lot of talent, but Jared Goff is playing lights out now. I mean, and it took him a decade to get there, I guess, but he's becoming a really, really good quarterback in that environment. And so I think, we're seeing over and over and over again, if you have the transcendent quarterback, the rest of the team looks a lot better, and the Giants just
And the
don't.
rest of it falls into place somehow.
Yeah.
Agreed. All right, Tony, we only have we have 10 more of these to do. We have 10 more of these to do, and are you looking forward to those?
Well, if you take the attitude that they need to draft a quarterback next year, then you can say, well, the Giants are actually in very good position right now, sitting at 2-5. I think they're number 8 in the Tankathon draft order, and with lots of chances to fall even farther and get into the top 5. So maybe that's what we root for the rest of the season. I don't know.
I don't know, Tony. It's just 10 more weeks, and we'll see what happens. All right. I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Giants fans, thank you as always for listening. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. And please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.